In a hospital room in Italy, a 15-year-old boy lay dying. His mother sat beside him, watching every breath grow shallower, knowing these were his final hours. Then he turned his head, looked directly into her eyes, and made a promise about her future. 5 words. Just 5 words that seemed impossible in that moment. 5 words she wouldn't understand until 4 years later, when something happened on the exact anniversary of his death, something that would either prove her son a prophet or break her heart one final time. This is the true story of Blessed Carlo Acutis, and the last conversation between a mother and her dying son that changed everything. To understand that conversation, we need to go back 3 weeks. 3 weeks before that hospital room, before the monitors and the medication, before everything fell apart. Back when Antonia Salzano still had a normal life, when her son Carlo was 15 and full of energy, spending hours at his computer, building a website to document Eucharistic miracles. He loved soccer. He loved Jesus. He was at that age where mothers start to see the man their son will become, even while he's still partly a boy. That's when the headaches started, headaches that wouldn't stop no matter what they tried. Then came the bruising that appeared without reason, spreading across his skin like shadows. The exhaustion followed, the kind that sleep couldn't fix, that rest couldn't touch. Every mother knows that feeling in your stomach when something is wrong with your child. That primal fear you can't explain but can't ignore. Antonia felt it growing stronger with each passing day. The doctor's office came next, then blood tests, then the phone call that made Antonia's legs give out. Acute promyelocytic leukemia, one of the most aggressive blood cancers known to medicine. The words hit her like a physical force. Within days, Carlo was in the oncology ward at Monza Hospital, and Antonia learned what every mother prays she'll never learn. That love cannot stop death. That all her years of keeping him safe, of protecting him from every danger, meant nothing against cancer moving through his body like wildfire. The disease was fast. Too fast for the treatments to work, too fast for hope to take root. Carlo's body weakened as Antonia watched, helpless in ways mothers are never supposed to feel helpless. She moved into that hospital room the way mothers do when there's nowhere else to be. She learned the rhythm of the monitors, the shift changes of the nurses, the particular smell of antiseptic that never quite masked the underlying scent of illness. She held his hand and counted his breaths the way she used to count them when he was a baby sleeping in his crib. Each breath a reminder that he was still here, still with her, still alive. But as the days passed in that hospital room, something happened that Antonia didn't expect. While other patients in the oncology ward cried out in pain, while other families fell apart in waiting rooms, Carlo remained calm. Not the false calm of someone in denial. Not the hollow calm of someone who had given up. Something else entirely, something that made Antonia study her son's face and wonder if he could see something she couldn't. One afternoon, his voice weak but steady, Carlo told her something that made her heart break and soar at the same time. "I offer all my suffering for the Pope and for the Church." The words came out with such conviction that Antonia found herself staring at him, searching his face for the fear that should be there. Any mother knows her child's fears. She'd seen fear in his eyes when he was small and thunder rolled overhead. She'd seen it when he fell and scraped his knees. She'd seen it in all the small ways childhood allows. But now, facing death itself, she saw only peace in those eyes. One evening, when the pain was particularly bad and Carlo's body tensed against waves of it, Antonia couldn't hold back any longer. She leaned close, needing to ask the question every mother would ask, even if she wasn't sure she wanted to hear the answer. "Carlo, are you scared?" He opened his eyes. He looked at her the way children look at their mothers when they're about to say something true, something that comes from the deepest part of who they are. And he smiled, that soft, knowing smile that would burn itself into her memory forever. "No, Mama. Jesus is waiting for me." 7 words that cracked something open in Antonia's chest. Because what do you say when your child tells you he's not afraid to die? When he talks about death the way other boys talk about going home after school? when he seems to already see what's waiting on the other side. But there was more Carlo needed to tell her, something he would say in their final conversation when death was hours away instead of days. 5 words that would make no sense until 4 years later, when the impossible became undeniable. That conversation came on the night of October 11th, 2006. The hospital had grown quiet in the way hospitals do after visiting hour's end. The hallways emptied, the only sounds were monitors beeping and footsteps and the particular silence of people waiting for death. Antonia sat in the chair beside Carlo's bed, the same chair she'd been sitting in for days, close enough to touch him, close enough to hear every breath. Outside the window, the city of Monza settled into night. Somewhere out there, mothers were tucking children into bed, kissing foreheads, taking for granted that tomorrow would come and their children would wake up. Antonia watched the distant lights and felt the weight of everything she would give to have that certainty back. Carlo's breathing had changed over the past few hours. Every mother knows her child's breath, the sound of it when they sleep, when they're sick, when something's wrong. Antonia knew this breath was different, shallower, more labored, each one an effort, each one might be the last. The nurses had been coming in more frequently, their visits closer together with each passing hour. They checked monitors, adjusted tubes, made notes on charts with faces carefully neutral, but eyes that told the story they wouldn't speak aloud. Time was running out. They all knew it. Most of all, Antonia knew it. She sat in that chair and felt time moving differently than it ever had before, racing toward an ending she couldn't stop, while also crawling through moments she wanted to hold forever. Every second felt both too fast and too slow, time bending around grief the way light bends around gravity. Carlo stirred, his eyes opened, and even in his weakness, even with death so close she could feel it in the room, he turned his head to look at his mother. Any mother would recognize that look. The one that says, "I need you." The one that has always meant comfort and safety and home. The one that hasn't changed from infancy to 15 years old. "Mamma," he said, his voice soft but clear, "don't be sad." The words settled into the quiet room like stones dropped into still water. Antonia felt tears start, the kind mothers cry when they can't protect their children from pain, when all the years of keeping them safe come down to this, sitting beside them while they die. Carlo lifted his hand slowly, the effort visible in every movement, each muscle working against the weakness that had taken over his body. He touched her cheek. It was the same gesture he'd used as a small child, that instinctive reaching for his mother when he needed comfort or wanted to give it. Now, dying, he was the one giving comfort. "From heaven, I'll help you," he whispered, his fingers warm against her face. "You'll see me again." Antonia covered his hand with hers, holding on, pressing his palm against her cheek, trying to memorize the feel of it. Every mother knows that panic, trying to hold on to the physical presence of your child, knowing you're about to lose it, knowing that soon there will be nothing left to touch. Then Carlo's voice dropped even lower, barely audible now. He said something else, 5 words about her future. 5 words that made Antonia's breath catch in her throat, that stopped time for just a moment. She looked at his face, searching for meaning in the dim light. She was his mother. She would always be his mother. But he was dying right in front of her. What future could she possibly have without him? What could those 5 words mean when her entire world was about to end? She wanted to ask, wanted to understand, wanted him to explain what he meant by those impossible words. But his eyes were growing heavy, his strength fading with each passing second, and she realized there might not be time for questions. There might not be time for anything except this moment, this touch, this final connection between mother and son. The 5 words hung in the air between them, suspended in that hospital room, like something she could almost touch but not quite grasp. Words that made no sense, an impossible promise from a dying boy to his mother. The night stretched on after that, and Antonia lived through the hours every mother prays she'll never have to live through. Carlo drifted in and out of consciousness as the hours crawled by. Sometimes he would open his eyes and find her face, and she would see recognition there, see that he knew she was with him. Other times his gaze looked past her at something she couldn't see, something in the distance that only he could perceive, as if the boundary between this world and the next was already growing thin. She held his hand and felt the warmth of it, and knew that warmth wouldn't last much longer. She was his mother. She had carried him in her body for 9 months, brought him into the world in pain and joy, kept him safe for 15 years. And now all she could do was sit here and watch him leave, powerless to stop it, powerless to do anything but be present for these final hours. Around 3 in the morning, a nurse came in, her footsteps soft on the floor. She checked the monitors, adjusted something on the IV line, her movements practiced and gentle. She glanced at Antonia with the look healthcare workers have when they know what's coming, the look that says hours, not days, maybe not even hours. Then she left without saying anything, because what was there to say that Antonia didn't already know? As dawn began to lighten the sky outside the window, as October 11th became October 12th, a priest arrived carrying the Eucharist. Carlo, despite his weakness, seemed to wake to its presence. This boy, who had spent so many hours of his short life researching Eucharistic miracles, who had loved Jesus with the uncomplicated devotion that made adults uncomfortable, received communion one last time. Antonia watched her son's lips move in prayer, watched his eyes close in that familiar expression of devotion she'd seen so many times before. For a moment, despite everything, the cancer, the hospital, the approaching death, his face settled into pure peace, the same peace she'd seen in him all through this ordeal. The priest finished his blessing and stepped back, his part in this ancient ritual complete. The room fell quiet except for the monitor, its beeping slower now, each interval between sounds growing longer, each beep a countdown that everyone in the room could hear, but no one acknowledged. Antonia counted the beeps the way she used to count her baby's breaths while he slept in his crib, that instinctive mother counting that never really stops, no matter how old your child gets. Carlo opened his eyes one final time. He looked directly at his mother with the clear gaze of someone who knows exactly what he's about to say, someone who has clarity even in the face of death. "I am happy to die," he said, each word deliberate despite his weakness, each syllable carrying the weight of complete conviction, "because I have lived my life without wasting even a minute on things that do not please God." Antonia heard her 15-year-old son summarize his entire existence in one sentence and find no regret in it. She heard him say he was happy to leave her. Not because he didn't love her, she could feel his love in every word, but because he loved something more, something bigger, something that waited for him on the other side. His voice softened to barely a whisper, "Mama, don't cry. I'm going to heaven." His eyes closed one last time, the monitor's beeping slowed further, the intervals stretching out like the last drops of sand through an hourglass. Antonia gripped his hand tighter, that instinct every mother has to hold on, to not let go, to anchor her child to this world through sheer force of will and love. But she felt him slipping away despite her grip, felt the life draining from his body while his hand was still in hers, while she was still touching him but losing him anyway. At 6:45 a.m. on October 12, 2006, the monitor made a sound different from all the others, a long, steady tone that means everything and nothing. That sound every mother understands, even if she's never heard it before, the sound that says, "Your child is gone." Carlo's chest rose once more, then settled, then went still. In the sudden quiet, Antonia made a sound she didn't recognize as her own. The sound a mother makes when the worst thing imaginable becomes real, when the thing you've been dreading for days finally happens, and it's somehow even worse than you imagined. She sat beside her son's body as the warmth slowly left it and replayed his words in her mind like a loop she couldn't stop. "From heaven, I'll help you. You'll see me again." And those 5 other words, the impossible promise about her future that he'd whispered when death was so close. She didn't believe them now, sitting here with his body growing cold. How could she? Her son was dead. Whatever future he'd spoken of had died with him, hadn't it? Those 5 words were just the confused mumblings of a dying boy, weren't they? October 12th, 2006. The date burned itself into her memory like a brand. The day she lost everything. The day the world stopped making sense. The day that would define the rest of her life. Or so she thought. Antonia buried her son in Assisi, the city of St. Francis, whose love for the poor and simple life had inspired Carlo so deeply. She went through the motions that people go through after loss, the rituals that society has built around grief, the funeral, the sympathy cards. The well-meaning people who said things like, "He's in a better place," and "God needed another angel." None of it helped. All of it made the emptiness louder, made the absence more present somehow. She went home to a house that was too quiet, where every room echoed with memories. Carlo's room was still there, exactly as he'd left it. His computer, his books, the ordinary evidence of a life stopped mid-sentence. Other mothers would understand the particular torture of that. The things you can't throw away because they still smell like your child. The clothes you can't donate because they're all you have left to hold. The door you can't quite bring yourself to close because closing it feels like accepting he's really gone. But Antonia did something with her grief, channeled it into something beyond just surviving. She talked about Carlo to anyone who would listen. She told his story. She kept his mission alive, documenting Eucharistic miracles the way he had, keeping his website running, refusing to let his short life fade into nothing. At night, though, alone with her thoughts, she was just a mother who had lost her child. She remembered the hospital room, his hand on her cheek. Those 5 words that still made no sense, that haunted her with their impossibility. Then, a few months after the burial, something happened that Antonia would dismiss at the time, but remember later with new understanding. She had a dream. In that dream, Carlo appeared to her, and he wasn't the dying boy from the hospital. He was whole, healthy, smiling, and in that dream, according to her testimony, he spoke to her. He repeated the same 5 words he'd whispered in the hospital room, those impossible words about her future. But this time, when he said them, he smiled. Not a sad smile, not a comforting smile, but a knowing smile, as if he knew something she didn't, as if those 5 words weren't just goodbye or comfort, but a prediction, a promise, a prophecy. She woke up with tears on her face and pushed the dream away, filed it in that category of things grief does to your mind. Just her desperate imagination trying to hold on to her son, she told herself, just her broken heart playing tricks on her in sleep, just wishful thinking from a mother who couldn't accept that her only child was really gone. Meanwhile, other people began reporting strange things, healings after praying for Carlo's intercession, answered prayers, moments that felt like someone reaching from beyond the grave to help them, to touch their lives, to prove that death wasn't quite the end everyone thought it was. The Catholic Church took notice of these reports and began investigating whether this teenage boy who had died at 15 might be declared blessed, might be recognized as someone who had lived a life of heroic virtue. Antonia participated in the investigation, answering questions about her son's life, his faith, his final days. She provided documentation, gave testimony, relived those hospital room hours again and again for investigators. But through it all, she carried the permanent ache that every mother who has lost a child carries. The empty space at the dinner table, the missing piece of her heart that can never be replaced, the constant awareness that something essential is gone from the world. The years passed in that way that time passes after trauma, both too slowly and too quickly. 2007, 2008, 2009. The grief didn't disappear. It just became part of who she was, woven into her daily life the way any permanent loss becomes, changing the texture of everything without ever really healing. She thought about those 5 words sometimes, usually late at night when sleep wouldn't come, the impossible promise, the dream where Carlo had smiled and repeated them with that knowing look. But she buried those thoughts alongside her son in Assisi. Some promises die with the person who makes them, she told herself. Some words are just words, no matter how much we want them to mean something more. Then came 2010, and everything changed. Antonia discovered she was pregnant, and the news hit her like a second grief. At her age, after years of believing her days of bearing children were over, after assuming her body was done with that particular miracle, the news felt surreal. She sat in the doctor's office and heard words she never expected to hear again: pregnant. But the ultrasound revealed something even more unexpected, something that made the room tilt slightly. Twins. 2 heartbeats where there had been emptiness. 2 lives growing where she had thought there was only grief and the slow work of survival. Any mother who has lost a child knows that complicated feeling that washed over Antonia in that moment. Joy mixed with guilt, because how can you feel joy when your other child is dead? Hope mixed with fear, because what if you lose these children too? The sense that moving forward means leaving your lost child behind, even though you know that's not true, even though you know grief and joy can coexist in the same heart. As the pregnancy progressed, as summer turned to fall, as her body changed to make room for these new lives, something began stirring in Antonia's memory, a feeling she couldn't quite name. A recognition that hovered just out of reach, like a word on the tip of your tongue that won't quite come. The dream kept surfacing in her thoughts. Carlo's face in the dream, healthy and smiling. Those 5 words he'd whispered in the hospital and repeated after death. The impossible promise that had made no sense at the time. She pushed the thought away every time it came. Coincidence, she told herself firmly. Biology, not prophecy. Her son had been dying, delirious perhaps, saying things that brought her comfort but held no power to change the future. The dream was just her grief manifesting in sleep, nothing more. But the feeling wouldn't leave her alone. It grew stronger as the weeks passed, as the twins grew inside her, as October approached with its changing leaves and cooling air. Something was building, some recognition she wasn't quite ready to face. The doctors monitored the pregnancy closely, attentive in the way doctors are when age and twins combine to create risk. They scheduled appointments, did ultrasounds, made careful plans for delivery. And then, late in September, they gave her the delivery date, wrote it on a card, circled it on a calendar. Antonia looked at the calendar, looked at the date circled in red ink, and her hands started shaking in a way she couldn't control. She stared at those numbers as if staring hard enough might change them, might make them different, might make this impossible thing not be happening. Her mind went back 4 years in an instant. Back to another hospital, back to monitors beeping slower and slower, back to dawn light through windows and a priest with the Eucharist. Back to the moment when her son took his last breath and the monitor went flat and time stopped. Back to October 12th, 2006, the day Carlo died. And now, 4 years later, the doctors were telling her the twins would be born on October 12th, 2010. The same date, not close to the same date, not near it, the exact same date, 4 years apart to the day. Antonia's breath caught in her chest, the same way it had caught in that hospital room when Carlo had whispered those 5 words, those impossible words. That promise she hadn't believed because believing seemed too painful, too much like false hope. She remembered the dream with sudden, sharp clarity, Carlo smiling, Carlo repeating those 5 words as if he knew something she didn't, as if he could see 4 years into the future. As if death hadn't stopped him from knowing exactly what was coming, exactly when it would come, exactly how it would unfold. Her hands wouldn't stop shaking, wouldn't steady no matter how hard she tried, because this couldn't be coincidence. The human mind rejects certain things as too impossible, too perfectly aligned, too much like a sign to be anything but supernatural, and this was one of those things. October 12th, the day her world ended, the day she lost her only child, the day the monitor went flat and time stopped and grief began. And now, October 12th again, the day she would give birth to twins, the day life would come into the world instead of leaving it, the day death's date would become birth's date. 4 years apart to the exact day. The weeks between seeing that date and reaching it were the longest of Antonia's life. Each day weighted with a significance she could barely comprehend. Every morning she woke up, counted the days until October 12th, felt the weight of what was about to happen pressing down harder. Because if the twins were born on October 12th, if this actually happened the way the calendar said it would, then those 5 words Carlo had whispered weren't just comfort from a dying boy trying to ease his mother's pain. They were prophecy, real prophecy, words spoken across time, across death itself. September ended in its slow way. October arrived with the same autumn colors it had brought 4 years ago. The leaves in Monza turned golden red, just as they had turned golden red when she was losing her son. Now she was about to gain 2 children, on the same date, the exact same date. She remembered every detail of that night 4 years ago with the kind of clarity trauma burns into memory. October 11th becoming October 12th. The quiet hospital, the monitor beeping slower. His hand in hers growing weaker, his last words spoken in whispers. "From heaven I'll help you, you'll see me again." And then those 5 other words, the ones that had made no sense at the time, the ones that had seemed like the confused hope of a dying boy. The night of October 11th, 2010, came with the inevitability of all appointed times. Antonia lay in a hospital bed, a different hospital from where Carlo had died, a different room, but the same date on the calendar. The same transition from October 11th to October 12th that she'd lived through once before in grief, now living through again in anticipation. 4 years ago on this night, she had watched her son die, had counted his breaths, had held his hand until it went cold. Now she was about to give birth, about to bring life into the world on the anniversary of death. The contractions came the way contractions come, building in waves. Labor progressed through the night, her body doing what bodies do to bring children into the world. And as the hours passed, as October 11th became October 12th, as the clock moved past midnight into the anniversary of Carlo's death, Antonia finally understood with a clarity that took her breath away. This wasn't coincidence. This wasn't random chance. This wasn't just biology, following its own timetable. This was Carlo keeping his promise. The delivery room filled with the controlled urgency of birth, the doctors and nurses moving with practiced efficiency, the pain and effort of bringing new life into the world that every mother knows. All of it happening on October 12, 2010, exactly 4 years after Carlo Acutis died at 6:45 a.m. in a hospital room in Monza. When the first baby was born, Antonia heard the cry, that first cry that means life and breath and existence, and felt something break open in her chest, something that had been locked tight since the day Carlo died. When the second baby was born minutes later, she wept in a way she hadn't wept since that morning 4 years ago, but these tears were different, carrying something besides grief. They placed the twins in her arms, warm bodies against her chest, alive, crying the way newborns cry when they first enter the world. She held them and felt their hearts beating against her, and remembered holding Carlo this same way 15 years ago, never imagining she would lose him and then, impossibly, be given this. October 12, 2006. Death came in the morning light. October 12, 2010. Life came in the morning light. 4 years apart, to the exact day. The same calendar date, the same moment in autumn, the same numbers that had marked the worst day of her life, now marking one of the best. And suddenly those 5 words from the hospital room made perfect, impossible, undeniable sense, every syllable clicking into place like a key turning in a lock. In that hospital room 4 years earlier, as death approached with its inevitable steps, as his mother held his hand and tried not to break apart completely, Carlo Acutis had looked at Antonia with those clear eyes and whispered 5 words that seemed impossible at the time. "You'll be a mother again." She hadn't understood. The words had made no sense to her grief-shocked mind. She was a mother. She was his mother. How could she be a mother again? What could those words possibly mean when her only child was dying in front of her? But Carlo had seen what she couldn't see, had known what she couldn't know. He had seen 4 years into the future with the clarity of someone who already stood with 1 foot in eternity. He had known about the twins before they existed. He had known about October 12th, about this exact date, about how his death date would become a birth date. He had known that the day his mother lost him would be the day she became a mother again. From heaven, exactly as he'd promised, Carlo had helped. The prophecy had come true, not approximately, not close, but exactly, to the day, to the date, to the impossible, undeniable, miraculous detail. The twins grew in the way children grow, filling the house with noise and life and the beautiful chaos that mothers know so well. Antonia's home, which had been too quiet for 4 years, came alive again. Baby cries in the night, toddler laughter in the morning. The sound of small feet running through rooms that had echoed with emptiness. The empty chair at the table stayed empty. She kept it there, kept that space for Carlo, but new chairs were added on either side. The grief didn't disappear, didn't pack itself away neatly. But it made room for joy in ways Antonia hadn't thought possible, hadn't dared to hope for in those dark years after his death. Every October 12th became 2 anniversaries lived in the same day. The worst day and the best day, the ending and the beginning, death and birth. Antonia would mark both, understanding now that they were connected in ways that defied every natural law she'd ever known. Connected by 5 words whispered by a dying boy who somehow, impossibly, knew the future. People who heard the story tried to explain it away the way people do when faced with things that don't fit their understanding of how the world works. Statistical probability, they said. Medical timing. Pure chance. Just coincidence. But any mother who heard the full story understood something different. Understood that some things can't be explained away with statistics. That sometimes a sign is just a sign. That 5 words spoken 4 years early and coming true to the exact date isn't coincidence. It's proof. Proof that love doesn't end. Proof that promises can echo across the boundary of death. Proof that the impossible sometimes happens exactly the way it was prophesied. On October 10th, 2020, 14 years after Carlo's death, Pope Francis officially declared him blessed in a ceremony that acknowledged what Antonia had known all along. Carlo Acutis became the youngest contemporary person to be beatified by the Catholic Church. Not an ancient saint from centuries past, but a teenager in jeans and sneakers who loved video games and pizza, who built websites and researched miracles, who died at 15, who made a promise from his deathbed and kept it from beyond the grave. His body rests now in Assisi, in the Church of Santa Maria Maggiore, in the city where St. Francis once walked. Mothers come from around the world to pray at his tomb, bringing their fears and their hopes with them. They bring their sick children, their struggling children, their worries about the future. They ask Carlo to intercede. They remember his story. They remember that he promised to help from heaven, and he did, exactly when he said he would, exactly how he said he would, exactly on the date that connected death to life. In that hospital room, in those final hours between mother and dying son, Carlo Acutis gave his mother something most people never receive in their lifetime. He gave her a promise she could hold on to when everything else was falling apart. 5 words, just 5 words, you'll be a mother again. Every mother understands what it means to want to help your child, to protect them, to guide them through life. We spend our entire lives doing that, from the moment they're born until the day we die. But Carlo reversed it in his final moments. With death approaching, with his own pain and fear to contend with, he chose to help his mother. He promised to help her. And then, 4 years later, on the exact anniversary of his death, he did. The story of Carlo Acutis isn't just about miracles or sainthood, or the Catholic Church recognizing someone's holiness. It's about what every mother knows in her bones, what every mother has always known. That the connection between mother and child doesn't break, not with distance, not with time, not even with death. Antonia sat in that hospital room and heard her son make an impossible promise. She held his hand and felt the life leave his body. She lived through every mother's worst nightmare, the thing we all fear most in the world. But Carlo's 5 words weren't just goodbye spoken to ease the moment. They were prophecy, real prophecy. And the twins born 4 years later on October 12th were the proof that love survives death. that promises made in hospital rooms can echo across years, that sometimes, impossibly, the exact date matters because someone who loved you saw the future and wanted you to know that hope remains. You'll be a mother again. 5 words that a 15-year-old boy spoke to his mother. 5 words that came true 4 years later to the exact day. 5 words that prove what mothers have always known in their hearts, but sometimes forget in their grief. Love never ends. Not really. Not ever. Blessed Carlo Acutis, pray for us. Pray for all mothers who have loved and lost. Pray for all children who want to help their parents. Pray for everyone who has ever had to say goodbye and wondered if they would ever see their loved ones again. The twins born on October 12, 2010, are proof that we will. Proof that promises keep. Proof that love survives everything, even death itself.